In a small Georgia town, a shocking double homicide sent the community reeling. Two parents were brutally killed, leaving neighbors, friends, and family stunned. The question on everyone's mind: how could this happen, and why? In the courtroom, 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick presented a starkly contrasting image. Calm, composed, and emotionally controlled, she seemed almost untouched by the gravity of the allegations. Looking at her, it was hard for anyone to reconcile the girl before them with the accused of unimaginable violence. The public and media were in disbelief. Some whispered, "Is she really capable of this?" Others wondered, "Will anyone even question her?" The tension in the room was palpable. On one side, the shocking brutality of the crime. On the other, the composed demeanor of a teenager. The contrast created an almost cinematic suspense. Every eye in the courtroom, every camera flash, capturing the strange paradox unfolding. The trial was set to begin on January 5th, with both the prosecution and defense preparing for the high-profile case. One hurdle already stood out: a pending evaluation from a neuropsychologist, with the reports scheduled to arrive just days before the trial. At its core, the case presented a central tension: a composed, seemingly ordinary teen accused of acts that would shake an entire community. Every moment in that courtroom underscored the impossible contrast: calm exterior, unimaginable allegation.
Given her childhood, this would not be surprising that one moment we're seeing emotions, another moment she's not seeing it. We're not seeing any type of emotions.
Tuesday brought Sarah Grace Patrick back to court, and the tension in the small Georgia courtroom was palpable. The case that had already shocked the community was moving forward, yet one critical piece of the puzzle remained unresolved. The defense team informed the court that a neuropsychological evaluation was still pending. They planned to call an expert witness during the trial, but the expert's report wouldn't arrive until just a few days before proceedings began. In other words, the courtroom was prepared for the emotional weight of the case, but the psychological explanation behind Sarah's actions was still unclear. Friends and family had already faced off publicly over Sarah's character. Some described her as caring and protective, someone who had endured years of trauma. Others were incredulous, struggling to reconcile the teenage girl. They knew with the allegations of a brutal double homicide, this gap in the evidence created an uneasy undercurrent. The prosecution could detail the events, but the defense's psychological narrative of potential explanation for her behavior was not yet complete. Everyone watching, from court officials to the media cameras rolling, sensed that a key dimension of the story had yet to be revealed. The courtroom was ready in every other way: the cameras, the reporters, the spectators, but the mind of Sarah Grace Patrick, and the reasons behind the horrific acts she was accused of, remained partly obscured. That uncertainty hung over the room like a shadow, adding to the anticipation for what was to come. Outside the Georgia courtroom, friends and family of Sarah Grace Patrick tried to shape the narrative before the trial even began. Their statements painted a very different picture from the shocking allegations inside the courtroom. Some spoke of her as someone inherently gentle, insisting that violence was not in her nature. Others emphasized the hardships she had endured, noting the moments of deep pain and tears she had faced over the years. Friends described her as a young girl who had navigated a turbulent family life, yet remained committed to those she loved. Particularly striking were references to her siblings. Witnesses repeatedly highlighted that Sarah had always protected her younger family members, acting as a shield in times of turmoil. Even in the midst of trauma, she had been the caretaker, the one others could rely on. The repeated pattern in these statements was clear: Sarah as caring, Sarah as protector, and Sarah as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. The public was left with a conflicting image: a composed, empathetic teen in stark contrast to the allegations of a brutal double homicide. These early impressions set the stage for the trial drama, adding complexity to the case. Everyone watching, from courtroom spectators to media cameras, was aware of the delicate balance between public perception and the unfolding evidence. Could this carefully crafted image influence how people viewed her actions? Inside the courtroom, the raw emotions of the victim's family cut through any carefully crafted narrative. Relatives of the deceased parents spoke with heartbreak and disbelief, their words exposing the human toll of the alleged crime. One family member said plainly, "My father didn't deserve this," while another added, "Someone capable of this should never be allowed to go free." Every statement highlighted the tension between loyalty, love, and the unthinkable loss they had endured. The emotional clash was impossible to ignore. On one side, the defense had painted Sarah Grace Patrick as a troubled but caring teen, a victim of circumstances. On the other, the family's grief and anger served as a stark reminder of the devastating reality: two lives brutally taken, leaving lasting scars. Courtroom observers, including media personnel, felt the weight of this confrontation. Every whispered question in the room, every camera focused on the family, emphasized the human cost behind the headlines and speculation. The contrast between the defense narrative and the reality of death created a tension that made the atmosphere in the courtroom almost unbearable. These testimonies would become a crucial backdrop for the trial, reminding everyone that while legal arguments could be made, the lives lost could not be undone. The stakes were painfully clear: The courtroom was not just a place for strategy and debate. It was the setting for confronting an unimaginable tragedy, caught in the aftermath of the tragic double homicide. The actions of Sarah Grace Patrick shocked both the public and investigators. Surprisingly, she was the one to place the 911 call, reporting the incident herself. She even delivered the eulogy at her parents' funeral, maintaining a calm, composed exterior that seemed almost rehearsed. But then, a different side of her behavior emerged. Sarah became active on TikTok, reaching out to content creators and attempting to share her story publicly. She appeared to be seeking attention, sympathy, or even validation from a wider audience. Her social media activity suggested more than just personal grief. It indicated a deliberate effort to shape public perception and control the narrative. Experts analyzing her behavior noted that this went beyond normal mourning. While grief can manifest in unusual ways, they highlighted that Sarah's actions suggested calculated, socially strategic behavior, possibly aimed at garnering sympathy or manipulating public opinion. It was a side of her personality that added complexity to the case, blurring the line between victimhood and calculated self-presentation. The contradiction was stark. A teen appearing emotionally composed while navigating tragedy, yet actively engaging in public forums to control the story. This duality became a key point for the prosecution and defense, raising questions about awareness, intent, and accountability. Even after the shocking double homicide, Sarah Grace Patrick demonstrated a level of awareness that went beyond ordinary teenage behavior. She reached out directly to true crime content creators, discussing her case and its potential coverage. In one interaction, she reportedly described the story as going to be a big hit, a remark that revealed a striking awareness of media impact. This behavior highlighted several key points. First, Sarah was media savvy, fully aware of how her story would be consumed by the public. Second, she displayed image consciousness, considering how her actions and narrative might be perceived. And third, she clearly thought about controlling the narrative, shaping public perception to her advantage even in the midst of an ongoing investigation. Experts examining this behavior emphasized that it was not the mark of a confused or disconnected teen. Instead, it suggested cognitive awareness and calculated thinking, an understanding of consequences, and a desire to influence the external world. These actions added a layer of complexity to the case, making the defense's arguments about immaturity or trauma less straightforward. The courtroom and public alike had to grapple with this paradox: a 17-year-old accused of horrific crimes, yet fully conscious of her image, her story, and the public's perception. The juxtaposition between calm composure, emotional control, and strategic public engagement created a tension that would define the trial narrative. As the trial progressed, questions about Sarah Grace Patrick's mental state became central. On the program, psychotherapist Dr. Janie Lacey provided insight into the complex dynamics at play. She acknowledged that mental illness was possible, given Sarah's history and childhood trauma. Yet, she cautioned that proving legal insanity would be extremely difficult. Dr. Lacey highlighted several key points. Sarah called 911 herself, reported the incident, and then remained active online for months, engaging with content creators and discussing her story. She even participated in planning and delivering her parents' funeral. These actions, Dr. Lacey explained, were calculated and cognitively aware, inconsistent with a legally insane or disconnected state of mind. The expert emphasized that trauma could explain some behavior, but it did not provide legal justification for violence. Complex patterns of emerging personality traits, emotional dysregulation, and trauma-related responses could exist. Yet Sarah's ability to strategize, communicate, and manage her public image demonstrated a high degree of awareness and control. The conclusion was clear. While her background and experiences might provide context, there was no doubt that cognitive awareness was present. She understood the consequences of her actions, and the potential public scrutiny they would attract. This analysis would become a pivotal element in the courtroom, helping both the prosecution and defense frame the debate around intent, accountability, and the fine line between trauma and conscious planning. Behind the shocking headlines in courtroom proceedings lies the troubled childhood of Sarah Grace Patrick. Her family history was marked by turmoil, a contentious divorce, allegations of drug exposure, and repeated domestic violence. These experiences created an environment far from stable, shaping the adolescent who would later stand accused in a high-profile trial at just 11 years old. Sarah approached the police with a simple yet profound statement: "I feel unsafe." Even at such a young age, she was acutely aware of the chaos surrounding her, and her plea highlighted the early trauma that would influence her development. Experts point to the impact of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, noting that chronic instability, exposure to violence, and household dysfunction can significantly affect emotional regulation, impulse control, and later behavior. For Sarah, these experiences may have contributed to her complex personality and the emerging traits observed during the trial. Yet experts are careful to draw a critical distinction. While trauma can explain behavior, it does not excuse violent acts. The line between understanding and justification is clear. Her history provides context but does not mitigate the severity of the alleged crime. The courtroom narrative now intertwined the past and present, a teen shaped by adversity, navigating grief, social awareness, and legal scrutiny, standing accused of acts that would forever alter her small Georgia community. Throughout the case, Sarah Grace Patrick presented a study in contrasts. In public appearances and at her parents' funeral, she was composed, emotionally controlled, and seemingly unaffected by the intense scrutiny surrounding her. Cameras captured her calm demeanor as she delivered the eulogy, interacting with the media, and even engaging with content creators online. Yet, inside the courtroom, a very different side of Sarah emerged. There were moments of visible breakdown, emotional volatility, and expressions of distress. Observers noted the stark difference between her public composure and courtroom reactions, leaving many to wonder which side represented her true self. Experts offered insight into this paradox. In cases of trauma-related disorders, emotional switching is not uncommon. Individuals may alternate between appearing unaffected and displaying intense emotional responses. Additionally, at ages 16 to 17, the prefrontal cortex responsible for impulse control and judgment is still developing. Coupled with emerging personality traits, this can result in unpredictable emotional displays. The duality of Sarah's behavior, public composure versus courtroom collapse, added a layer of complexity to the trial. It forced both the court and the public to confront the nuanced reality of adolescent development, trauma history, and the intersection of accountability and psychological context. This contrast became one of the defining features of the trial narrative, highlighting that even a seemingly composed teen could harbor profound psychological and behavioral complexity. From the outset, law enforcement approached the Sarah Grace Patrick case with meticulous care. Despite the emotional weight of a brutal double homicide, the police did not immediately assign blame. Instead, they conducted a thorough investigation, examining every detail, witness statement, and piece of evidence over the course of several months. Only after painstaking work did authorities declare Sarah the primary suspect. The timeline emphasized that the case was built on careful analysis rather than assumptions, rumors, or public pressure. Every step reflected the principle that justice should be grounded in facts, not emotions. Investigators also noted the importance of context. They examined Sarah's social media activity, interactions with content creators, and the timeline of her public behavior, integrating this information with forensic evidence to form a coherent narrative of the events leading up to the tragedy. The measured pace of the investigation sent a clear message. High-profile cases, especially involving juveniles, require patience and precision. Jumping to conclusions could jeopardize justice, distort public perception, and fail to honor the victims for prosecutors, defense teams, and the public. This careful approach underlined that the trial was fact-driven, not even amid the emotional intensity surrounding a teen accused of a horrific crime, the investigation remained grounded in evidence, reinforcing the credibility and integrity of the legal process. One of the most harrowing aspects of the Sarah Grace Patrick case centers on her younger sister. Tragically, she was the one to discover the bodies of their parents. The sheer weight of that moment is almost unimaginable, compounding the grief of the family with a personal trauma that would last a lifetime. This revelation raised critical public questions. If Sarah was indeed involved in the killings, what did that mean for her younger sibling? How could someone expose a child to such a devastating scene, leaving them to process the enormity of loss and horror at such a tender age? Experts highlighted the secondary trauma experienced by children in such situations. Even witnessing or discovering violent events can have profound psychological effects, impacting development, emotional regulation, and future relationships. In this case, the trauma was intensified because it involved a family member allegedly responsible for the violence. The public grappled with the emotional complexity of the situation, sympathy for the younger sister's suffering, intertwined with outrage and disbelief at the alleged actions of her older sibling. Courtroom observers noted the chilling reality. The crime did not just end with the parents, it reverberated through the lives of those closest to them, leaving scars that could not easily be healed. The situation underscored the far-reaching impact of familial violence, reminding everyone that in some cases, the ripple effects of tragedy extend beyond immediate victims, touching the lives of innocent children in ways both profound and irreversible. The Sarah Grace Patrick case forces a confrontation between appearance and reality, perception and fact. On one hand, there was public sympathy for a young teen with a troubled past, a girl shaped by trauma, family instability, and personal loss. On the other hand, the forensic evidence painted a starkly different picture, one of deliberate and violent acts that could not be ignored. The tension between trauma, background, and accountability is central. Experts emphasized that while adverse childhood experiences may explain some behavior, they do not excuse homicide. Sarah's history provided context, but it could not diminish the severity of the alleged crime or the lasting impact on her family and community. Another layer of contrast emerged in the courtroom, her calm appearance versus the disturbing evidence against her. Observers struggled to reconcile the composed, articulate teen with the brutality of the crime and the meticulous nature of her social media and public engagement. The duality raised questions about adolescent development, impulse control, and emerging personality traits, critical considerations when assessing intent and awareness. Ultimately, the case highlights a chilling reality: a teenager who thought no one would question her, relying on public perception, social image, and personal composure to shield her from scrutiny. Yet, the evidence refused to bend to her image. The legal process, forensic investigation, and expert analysis combined to confront both the public and the courtroom with an uncomfortable truth. Appearances can be deceiving, and accountability cannot be escaped. The image was striking. A 17-year-old girl, Sarah Grace Patrick, smiling, composed, and seemingly in control. Cameras captured her calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the gravity of the charges she faced. Onlookers could hardly reconcile the image of a composed teen with the brutality of the double homicide and the devastating impact on her family. Yet, the evidence spoke louder than appearances. Every forensic detail, every witness testimony, and every piece of digital activity systematically undermined the narrative. Or perhaps those around her swore to project. Her calm, public-facing persona could not erase the facts of the crime. The trial highlighted the tension between perception and reality. Trauma, family history, and adolescent development provided context but did not absolve responsibility. Experts emphasized that while emotional regulation and trauma responses can vary, intent, awareness, and calculated behavior were evident. The courtroom, the public, and the media all witnessed the collision between a carefully curated image and the unflinching truth of the evidence. In the end, the lesson was unmistakable. A teenager who may have believed silence and public sympathy would shield her from scrutiny faced a judicial process that demanded accountability. The court did not allow appearances to dictate outcomes. The facts were clear, and justice followed them relentlessly. Final line. She thought silence and sympathy would protect her, but the facts refused to look away.